Whoa, what is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. More and more news coming out with training camp. A lot of exciting tidbits here and there. I'm not a guy that's going to get overly excited. I do get, I like watching the clips just like everybody else. Football's around the corner. Hawkins has looked really good. I know Giants fans are pumping him up. Jalen Hyatt has looked impressive at times at camp. Daniel Jones has looked great so far by all accounts. I've seen a lot of his throws. Looks great. And hopefully it continues. I think tomorrow the pads come on, so we'll get to assess, I guess, the offensive line at least a little bit. And then our first preseason game is like 10 days away. So by the time that comes around, that's where you really start to get the juices flowing if you're a New York Giants fan. So really excited for this football team. Really excited for this year. But now that the season's not quite here yet, I do think this is an important topic, an important video to go over. So I've been meaning to make this video for about a week or two and kind of talk about Joe Schoen's vision as RGM, because I think that's important. I think that's the most important thing right now, how he intends to build this team. As Giants fans, we're all concerned not just with this year, but for the next 5-6 years. How is he going to build this team? How are we going to have sustained success? Did he damage the long-term future? Because that was a big thing this offseason. You can't sign Daniel Jones because if you do that, you're not going to be able to build the team. You have to sign Thomas. You have to sign Dexter Lawrence. The disease of me. We all heard about that, right? Well, I think Joe Schoen showed you that you could certainly sign Daniel Jones to a reasonable deal and continue to build up this football team and give yourself so many options along the way. I'm going to talk about how good of a job he did with these contracts, why it was so smart to sign these contracts when he did, specifically with Andrew Thomas, and the structuring of these contracts. He did a really good job. Like, he was really diligent. Like, he didn't backload anything. Everything's pretty much a flat rate, and he still gives himself so much cap space. And these contracts are fluid. You could always maneuver them. You could always move money around. And obviously, Dable and Schoen are building a culture like these guys are signing before they probably should in terms of the amount of money that they may be able to command somewhere else. Why? Because they're happy. They want security. They want to make sure they get their money, but they're happy where they are. That's why Andrew Thomas signed the deal that he did. The same thing with Dexter Lawrence. But had Andrew Thomas waited 2 more years, trust me, he's going to get 30. He ain't getting 23 and a half. He's getting 30, maybe even more. Dexter Lawrence, same thing. He waits another year, he'd get a lot more. But obviously, it was smart for him because he wasn't signed under contract past this year. But regardless, Joe Schoen has done a tremendous job building not just for the here and now, but long term. And when you think about what he inherited to begin with, he literally inherited the worst cap situation in the NFL. Do we forget? His first year, he couldn't even keep James Bradberry on the roster. He had to cut our best cornerback because he had no cap space. And he was smart. He was disciplined. He could have backloaded contracts and further damaged the future cap space in order to keep a guy like Bradberry last year. He didn't do it, despite some of the fan outrage that he knew he would get, because he knows he's building this team long term. He didn't damage the future cap space. He knew he was going to want some money to keep a guy like Thomas, to keep a guy like Dexter Lawrence, to potentially keep a guy like Jones. Even though obviously going into last year, he didn't know that would be the case. It proved to be, but he left himself some wiggle room in order to do that. Had he signed a guy like Bradberry, he would have had to backload so many other salaries. It's a domino effect. We saw it with Dave Gettleman. And I tried to understand why Gettleman did what he did, even though obviously it was a horrible move in terms of backloading all the contracts during the pandemic. He saw Daniel Jones was coming up on, I think, the 3rd year of his rookie deal, and he was trying to get the team, as good as he possibly could, and he failed miserably. It was a horrible offseason. But not only did you sign Kenny Golladay and Adoree Jackson in a year where the cap went down due to the pandemic, by doing that, it forced you to backload Bradberry's contract, Blake Martinez's contract, and Leonard Williams' contract, which we're still paying for, in addition to, of course, Golladay and Adoree Jackson's contract that you signed that year. And for Joe Schoen to just completely get out of that mess within 1 year speaks volumes. And for him to have the cap situation that he has long-term, which we'll go over in this video, that he does after that, and after the fact that he signed 3 Giants to mega deals. Andrew Thomas is the highest paid left tackle in the history of the NFL in terms of guaranteed money. Dexter Lawrence is one of the top 2 or 3 highest paid interior defensive linemen in football. And Daniel Jones got a $40 million a year contract. Yet the cap looks great. It's a great situation with a lot of options long term. So I think Joe Schoen is really showing you that he understands roster building, that he understands how to build a long-term winner, in my opinion at least. And obviously this is all going to come down to drafting. You can be great at cap management. If you can't draft, you're not going to win. We all know that. So Joe Schoen's going to need to hit on his draft picks, Kayvon, Neal, Banks, so on and so forth. But that is how the best teams win. They don't go on spending sprees. They don't go out and splurge and spend, on top dollar on free agents. That's not the right way to build. The worst teams in football always have the most cap space. So they're always the most excited in the offseason because they get these new shiny toys, kind of like we were when we got Solder, when we got Galladay, when we got Adoree. But that's not the way to win. The way to win is to draft well, retain your players, sign them before they hit their free agent year. Because you think about Andrew Thomas. Andrew Thomas, had he not been signed, would hit free agency in 2025. That's when we were signing players. That's when we were signing the Nate Solders, when we were paying for market rate. With Andrew Thomas, you extend your guy 2 years early, you're getting a bargain. You're getting $7 million off a year on average. Same thing with Dexter Lawrence. You know what I'm saying? So that's how the best teams build their team. They build throughout the draft, and they identify their long-term pieces early, and they sign them to long-term deals as quickly as they can. And we're going to get into all of it throughout the video. But you think about how good of a deal that Thomas deal was. Look at the cap. This is the projected cap in 2027. It's wild. $328 million a year. By that time, Andrew Thomas will still have 2 more years on his contract on a $23.5 million average. $23.5 million on $328 million. That's nothing. That's nothing. That's, what is that, about 7%? 7% in today's market? You're talking, like $16, $17 million for one of the better left tackles in football? That's why you sign the deals that you do. In 2027, Andrew Thomas would be worth $36, $37 million a year. He just will. The Nate Solders of the world, the highest paid free agent left tackles in 2027 will be going for $37 million a year. And we'll have Andrew Thomas smiling like rainbows and butterflies. We'll be like, you just paid $37 million a year for the best free agent tackle, who's probably like the 14th or 15th best. You paid $37 million a year. I got Andrew Thomas for 23 because we drafted him well and we understood when to extend him. So that's what the best teams do. Now we're going to go over some of the salary cap. We'll start with 2024. After all that spending, and of course, there's variables to this, right? We still have to potentially keep Barkley next year. He may be tagged. McKinney's on the menu as well. He could be kept. But right now, the New York Giants sit with the 9th most cap space after all that spending, after taking a $45 million hit next year with Daniel Jones' contract, which we'll talk about. There's an option with that as well for them to be able to free up some more money if this team continues to accelerate this year. But they're in a great spot. Same thing the next year. We're 14th. That's kind of right where you want to be, middle of the pack, $127 million in space with all those guys under contract. And, of course, you're going to have other players. Kayvon Thibodeau. Evan Neal, potentially, if he gets his head out of his butt. Those guys will command extensions probably by around this time in 2025, after their 3rd or 4th year, if the New York Giants identify those guys as long-term pieces. And they'll do the same thing. They'll sign them early if they feel like they're going to be a big part of the core piece of this team long-term. They'll sign them early. They'll get the extensions done with, and they'll kick in a very similar fashion to the Andrew Thomas, to the Evan Neal deal. And I love the way that Joe Schoen currently is starting to build this team. We'll start with the Daniel Jones contract. I've talked about it extensively, but he left himself options. He left himself options with all of these contracts. The dead hit on year 3, $18 million on a $39.5 million salary. Of course, there are incentives he could reach. That number will probably be higher. I think it's a true 3-year commitment. I think you will definitely see Jones here through 2025. I don't think he sees the end of this contract. He either gets an extension after that or they rip it up. But I think you're going to see 3 years of Jones. But there's options that they could do with this contract that I'll talk further about once we get into this year's salary cap. Then you got a guy like Andrew Thomas. Look at this deal. It's a flat rate, right? Look at the cap hit. Every year, 23, 20, 20, 22, 22, 22, $22 million in 2029. Dude, people are going to be paying that for free agent kickers. Obviously not. I'm exaggerating a bit. But I just showed you the salary cap in 2027 is going to be $328 million. Now, of course, by that time, Andrew Thomas is probably going to command a raise, probably after the 2028 season. But look at the maneuverability in this contract. It's beautiful. By 2027, only 2 years into that extension, it's a $3 million hit. God forbid Andrew Thomas, goes down with injuries, so on and so forth. You always want to leave yourself options. And that's what Joe Schoen did with this deal. There's no dead cap hit after really the first 2 years of the extension. He gets it all front-loaded, and it's spaced out very well. There's not a year where there's really a balloon in this deal. It's kind of a flat rate. Then you look at Dexter Lawrence. Sexy Dex, he signs his deal. This year, of course, he takes a little bit lower of a hit so they could retain some of their players, $6 million. Next year, 21, 21, 24, and 23. Pretty much a flat rate. Same thing with Dexter Lawrence. And by that time, he'll be 30, and they'll reassess. He'll be the same age as Leo is now. So who knows if we'll see a contract after that. Hopefully he does. I love Sexy Dexy, but we'll see. But you know that you have him locked in now, really probably through the 2027 season. And much like the past deal, there's options. It's only an $8 million hit after 2025. If he goes down with an injury, it's only a $4 million hit in 2027. So, I mean, how do you not love this? And as he continues to build, as this team continues to get better, he has options to further backload these salaries if he wanted to, right? To move Daniel Jones's contract around. You look at next year's salary cap. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's kind of small, but I'll read it. Jones, of course, is the big hit at 45. You have Thomas at 23. You have Lawrence at 21. Waller at 13. Okereke at 11. But look at all the impact players we already have under contract. Kayvon Thibodeau. Darius Slayton could be a cut candidate if they need to save some money. $6 million if you cut him, 7.7 if you keep him. So you save nearly all of the contract if you were to move on. So that I think a lot of that will depend on Jalen Hyatt and everything else this year. Kowinski's a guy you're clearly going to cut. 1.5 to cut, 7.2 to keep. That's like $6 million in savings. At this point this year, you're hoping Azudu develops into that starting guard. And there's other options. But I think one huge option next year, if Jones progresses this year, is to move his money around. I think that's why they put the balloon there this next year, jumping it from 21 to 45, knowing that if this team elevates, if Jones shows he is now in that upper echelon of quarterbacks, top 7, top 8, top 9, has a big year, the team makes the playoffs, Daniel Jones would be stupid. He's smart enough to know this, not to try to space out the money a bit, to try to help this team build. Because if the team continues to get better, he continues to play well, he's only going to get another massive contract in a couple of years. So next year, if the Giants come up a playoff berth and they look good and they say, Jones, we want to space your money out a bit. Let's lower that cap hit from 45 to 28. We'll give you, we'll backload the contract a bit more. We'll give you a little bit more guaranteed money, a little bit more security. This kind of ensures that you're going to be here for at least the 3 years of the deal. Of course, he's going to say yes. Get me more help. Get me more options. So they leave their options open next year with these deals. And I think you got to realize that you could move this money around. There's so much they could do. 2025. I mean, same thing, right? When you look at what they've got, like I said, they got over $127 million. If they keep the Jones contract intact as is, he's currently a $39 million hit in 2025, which by that point, that's not much for a quarterback. It's just not. The cap's going to be about 275. So you're talking, 12, 13% for a quarterback on his second contract. That's not a whole hell right there. Actually says it on the right, 13.4%. Dexter Lawrence, when that contract first kicks in, 7%. Andrew Thomas, 7%. Like, these are reasonable deals, the way that he was able to structure these deals. I absolutely love the way that Joe Schoen is building. I really do. I absolutely love everything that he's done since he's taken over as the New York Giants general manager. He's taken the worst cap situation in the NFL, and he's made it one of the healthiest. And don't get it twisted. There's going to come a point where this team feels like they are ready to compete for a Super Bowl. And maybe that'll be in 2 years. Maybe it'll be next year. Who knows? And when that time comes, they'll do things like the Eagles did to open up that Super Bowl window, to try to capitalize on the 2 or 3 year window that they feel they have, where they back out of the hell out of the Jalen Hurts contract. It's a risky move, but given the Eagles' current situation, it's the right one. As the Giants continue to build this team, they will be able to hopefully take advantage of the salary cap as well. But for everybody that said signing Daniel Jones is going to kill the roster, you're not going to be able to build the roster, the salary cap looks as clean as it almost possibly could be. And that's after the New York Giants extended 3 players. From 2011 to going into this year, the Giants had only extended 2 players that they had drafted to multi-year deals. I'm excluding Pierre-Paul because he was drafted in 2010. That's Odell Beckham and that's Sterling Shepard. And they traded Beckham before the contract kicked in for a guy that they signed to a multi-year extension in Dexter Lawrence. This offseason alone, they extended 3 to long-term multi-year extensions. That's what the best teams do. You look around the league. Good teams lock their players up as quickly as they possibly can. And that's something that the New York Giants have not been able to do for a very long time, due in large part to the drafting of Jerry Reese and at least partially to get him. And you got to give him some credit for these draft picks, but overall, the drafting was okay and the free agency was awful and the coaches were awful. Now, I think we finally have a general manager in place that has a clear plan. He's carrying it out, and he's kind of a balance of everything. He doesn't overspend in free agency like the 2 previous GMs did, or at least that's the opinion that we get thus far. He didn't really have an option year 1. This year, he didn't overspend in free agency. And he has a plan. We'll see how his drafts carry out, but his plan is to build through the draft. And that's what the best teams do. You got to love the plan, at least, for Joe Schoen. The question is, will he carry it out? As always, guys, if you like what you watch, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.